Hello, good people of YouTube, Mountbatten here, and today I'm bringing you guys 5 premium ships that have refused to be power crept or made obsolete by changes made to the game. And by that I mean, well, it's kind of self-explanatory. These are 5 premium ships that they have stood the test of time. Most of these ships are well over 2 years old. Actually, I think the youngest ship on this list is actually like only 2.5 years old. And by that point, especially with the changes made to the game, there are several premium ships that their glory days are gone, kind of like the Belfast. When the Belfast originally came out, she was insanely overpowered and they had to pull her from the store. But nowadays, Belfast isn't really even that overpowered. It's actually quite normal. And then you have ships that unfortunately they're just kind of made obsolete by changes made to the game, like the Texas and the Atlanta. Both ships that used to have absolutely god levels of AA, now it's literally a joke, their AA. And the Atlanta got a double whammy with not just the AA changes, but then the IFHE changes as well, to where it is literally just a shadow of its former self. Even though it does have its fans still, there's no denying that the ship certainly has lost much of its appeal over the past couple of years. So anyway, these are 5 ships that have not had that happen to them. They are still quite good ships, and ships that I would recommend you pick up if you ever think about buying them. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. Coming at number 5, we have the Mutsu, the Tier 6 Premium Japanese Battleship. So the Mutsu has 16-inch shells actually at Tier 6, and the way they balance that is that she uses the World War I era shell and not the World War II era shell, which means that from close in, her pins are much better than the further out you try to hit targets. So try to shoot a target at her maximum range, her pins are quite lacking. But when you get close in, let's say about half of her range and further in, so about 12 kilometers inward, she packs one heck of a punch. Not to mention she also has good secondaries on top of that if you build into them, and she has torpedoes at Tier 6, and her torpedoes are quite interesting because she only has 4 of them. However, they do reload in 20 seconds each, and they're mounted in her hull too, so they don't get knocked out as much as if they were mounted onto the deck. So while she doesn't have a wall of torpedoes like the Gneisenau does, where in your brawl you can launch 3 torpedoes at the enemy ship at once, you can still get 2 out, and they do still come quite in handy in a brawling situation. And funnily enough, when you're having to fight destroyers from close range, because you can single drop these you have to single drop these torpedoes because they are single launchers, so they are quite good for that. Not to mention the Mutsu is fairly maneuverable for a Tier 6 ship. She is kind of weighty when you're trying to turn, but she can still turn pretty quickly compared to some other Tier 6 ships. And she is pretty tough. She's not the toughest Tier 6 battleship, but definitely tougher than her tech line counterpart, that's for sure. And if you play her right, she can do fantastically well in Tier 6 matches, even when she's up to Tier 8, because she still does have 16-inch guns. And the meta down at Tier 6 isn't quite as snipey as Tier 10 and higher, Tier 8 and higher matches are. So there's still plenty of brawling going on there, plenty of close range fighting going on, and the Mutsu is just fine with that. Alright, moving on to number 4, we have the Tier 6 Premium British Battleship, the Warspite. So actually the first ever British battleship added into the game. This ship has been around for quite some time. So the Warspite has 8 15-inch guns at Tier 6, so just like the Mutsu, she can overmatch the bow armor of other battleships. And she has normal battleship AP. She does not have the British BB AP because, well, that wasn't a thing back in the day. And she doesn't have British BB HE either. So some people can see that as a plus, some people will see that as a minus. I see that as a huge plus because the Warspite has some fantastically accurate guns. Way more accurate than the tech line counterpart, the Queen Elizabeth. So at Tier 6, you have accurate 15-inch guns with normal BB AP. You do the math there. You can constantly hit targets at medium and long range with the Warspite and do darn good salvos to them. Now, in order to get guns this good, you do have to give up some other elements of the ship, and that has very much happened with the Warspite. Her turrets are, I think they're tied with Miami for being some of the slowest turrets in the game. And while she is pretty tanky, she is chunky. By that I mean you probably won't get citadeled in the Warspite, but you will get chunked pretty darn good. in the match you're watching right now, the Leon did catch my, well, not even my broadside, just my Warspite just not angled enough. He took off some pretty good chunks here and there, so that does happen. However, you do also get an improved heal with the Warspite. You may hear me refer to some ships' heals as a Warspite heal. That means it is an improved heal. It's not a super heal like the Conqueror, where you can literally print back almost all the ship with the press of a button. But it is a very much improved heal to where you will heal back a lot more health than you would with a normal heal. So it does have all that going for it, and it is quite maneuverable. It's not the fastest battleship in the world, but it can turn pretty darn good. A lot better than some other tier 6 battleships, let me tell you that. So Warspite's still around and kicking, and she's still just as strong as ever. Alright, moving on to number 3 now, we have the Prince Eugen. So the Prince Eugen is, in many ways, a better hipper. She does have a couple of drawbacks that the hipper does get, and that is, first and foremost, her reload time. She has a slightly longer reload time than the hipper, but you do get a lot of stuff by giving up those few seconds of reload time. So you do get a heal, first off, something that I do believe that the hipper does need after grinding through it. For those of you that don't know, the way the hipper's armor is set up in the Prince Eugen, it's kind of weird to where it's turtleback, that good old German turtleback, but just the geography of the ship means that you eat citadels from really, really, really weird angles in the hipper. And, I mean, you can be angled and a shell can just nick you in the stern and boom, citadel. It's weird. But the hipper does get a heal to kind of negate that in exchange for a 2-second longer reload time on her guns. And on top of that, she also has torpedoes with a 6-kilometer range. Great AA for a tier 8. Well, it used to be great AA. Nowadays, again with AA, it's kind of all over the place. But I'm finding that she still does have pretty good AA. And you get hydroacoustic search and a catapult fighter all on one ship. So heal, torps, hydro, and a catapult fighter all in one cruiser. Now, the Prince Eugen was actually the cruiser that got me to start playing cruisers. I bought her in a bundle with the Alabama and another Japanese DD, and I started to play the Eugen. I'm like, hey, this is actually kind of fun. So I started to branch out, and that's how I eventually grinded up the German cruiser line and got the Hindenburg, my first tier 10 cruiser. So this ship does have a bit of a special place in my heart, so there is that. But it is still a very good ship, still perfectly capable of performing at its tier and above, and plus that hill really helps out nowadays with some of the ships that have been introduced, like the Smolensk, the Jean Bart, because good God, that thing could chunk you if you run across one of those. The Jean Bart's a monster in and of itself, but anyway, like all the other snipey ships that have been added into the game, the Prince Eugen still can hold its own with its heal and with its pretty decent TPM, even though it is worse than the hipper. And not to mention that with all the new carriers being added in, the Prince Eugen still does, in my opinion, have pretty darn good AA. So you've got that going for you as well. And it does get German HE, and that means that you can pin better with the Prince Eugen's guns than a ship with similar caliber guns of another nation, because Germans get that German HE pin, where you only have to divide by 1/4 of the caliber, and thus you can pin more armor. So it's got that going for it as well, so there's no need to take IFHE on this ship if you were even thinking about it. There's no reason to take IFHE on any German ship, actually, but some people do for reasons. But anyway, Prince Eugen's still a very strong tier 8 cruiser, and I would recommend picking it up if you ever get around to considering purchasing it. Moving on down to number 2, we have the tier 8 premium US destroyer, the Kidd. Now, the Kidd is a Fletcher that has been down tiered to tier 8, and it's given up one of its torpedo tubes for more AA. On top of that, it gets a heal, DFAA, still has the American smoke, and its torpedo tubes have been replaced with a set of Benton torps. Now, the Kidd is a fantastic destroyer, because one, it's got a heal at tier 8, which is fantastic for new DD players. It's kind of more forgiving than other destroyers for sure, but if you slip up, you're still dead in it. Don't get me wrong. Which means it's pretty good at taking on other destroyers in a gunfight because, well, it can heal back that damage. And it's got fantastic AA still. Even after all the AA changes, it's got completely it's a no-fly zone. Especially with that DFAA activated. Especially if you build into it as well. Which is why Kidd is popular for the CV hunting divisions. And Kid, of course, is also a very, very, very close museum ship to me. I spent the night on it when I was in Boy Scouts, so it was a pretty cool experience. It's also pretty cool to see it in the game and to be able to just drive about 3 hours away from where I live and go visit the ship in and of itself. But it is also still, of course, a very, very good ship in game. It's a fantastic gunboat. It does have American HE and American arcs, so the shells are really floaty when you get out to long ranges, but when you're fighting sub 10 kilometers, it doesn't really matter that much. So it's still a fantastic destroyer that has just absolutely refused to go the way of the Dodo, especially after all the AA changes. And that's another thing, like I was talking about earlier, the Texas and the Atlanta, their AA has been absolutely neutered. But the Kid has still managed to maintain its reputation as a no-fly zone despite all the changes that have happened to the game since then. So it still has that going for it, and with its other pluses, it still has a long way to go. Alright, moving on down to number 1. We have the Tier 8 Premium German battleship, the Turpitz. So the Turpitz, it's still the Turpitz. Despite the introduction of many brawling ships, the Turpitz is still, at Tier 8 at least, the king of brawling. The closest thing that could potentially remove it from this position is like the Odin, but when comparing the Turpitz and the Turpitz still does beat the Odin out in my opinion, very slightly, just because it does have obviously much more health and larger caliber guns, which in a brawling situation is what you need. The Odin is still a very good battleship in my opinion, but the Turpitz just beats it out by nature of health and gun caliber. So Turpitz has 8 15-inch guns. They're, of course, German 15-inch guns, which means that they're not all that accurate, but after the German dispersion buff of some time ago, they're much more workable now than they were 2 years ago. And plus, she has great secondaries. You can get them out to 11.6 kilometers, and there's no need to take IFHE because most of the secondaries can pin 32 millimeters of armor. She has torpedoes, which is just the absolute trump card in a brawling situation, because that's just 40,000 damage you can just throw at the enemy ship, and they will more than likely suffer the consequences of it. She's such a fantastic ship. Her downsides are that she doesn't have that great of AA, and she doesn't get hydroacoustic search compared to the Bismarck. The Bismarck has a much better AA and gets hydro. The Turpitz had to give those up in order to get the torpedoes. So she's still the king of brawling, despite there being many ships which have been added which could potentially dethrone her, such as the Massachusetts, the Odin, the Lenin. I know Lenin isn't often thought of as a brawling ship, but it is a very good ship at close range. The Key. All these ships have come, and Turpitz has still remained the king of brawling, at least at Tier 8. Then, of course, now there's a Palmer at Tier 9, which is basically a Tier 9 Turpitz, because you take what makes the Turpitz and apply that to the Palmer, and that's pretty much, and apply that to the FDG. That's pretty much what they did with the Palmer, and with a change of gun caliber thrown in there as well. So Turpitz still remains the king of brawling after all these years. Alright guys, that is 5 ships that have stood the test of time and have refused to be power crept by changes to the game. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? What would you change? What are your 5 ships that are your to-go ships from yesteryear that are still very much potent today in game? Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We are on our way to 20,000 subs. We recently passed 16,000, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. I hope to catch you guys in the next one.